I want to show you guys the crazy story of how I took off 1 minute and 34 seconds of my 2 mile in just 1 year. This is my crazy journey from 6th to 7th grade. But first, I'm gonna apply some context. Before seriously running, I'd shown more interest in football, but still managed to run a 6:14 mile in 5th grade. But the next year in early 6th grade, I didn't make the team, leading me to join cross country. Little did I know that this would be the best decision I've ever made. I joined the team 2 weeks late, but I still managed to get in some quality training before my first cross-country race of middle school. By this point, I had met some people that some of you guys may know, like Charlie and Miles. Miles currently being the best on the team, and our first meet was at a state park called Palo Corona. My goal coming into this race was to run 12:30, considering that I just ran a 6:04 mile at our team's time trial. And as the race went on, I noticed that I actually happened to be in a pretty high placement with only about 7 to 10 runners ahead of me. I remember finishing just behind Miles at the end to finish in 12:13, placing first for 6th grade. Fast forward a tiny bit more into the season and we finally had our own home meet. At this point in the season, I had surprisingly become the best on the team with a PR of 12:10, but we also had a runner on our team named Peter who performed better than he ever had. At around the start of the race, you can see that Peter was about 4 to 6 meters ahead of me, which I had not expected at all, giving me a bit of a shock. I remember coming to the first mile in about 5:58, which funnily enough happened to be my first time running under 6 minutes in the mile. By this point of the race, I was tired but wanted to make up the ground that Peter had gapped me by, and with 400 meters to go, we were neck and neck. We came down the home stretch right next to each other, but Peter beat me to the line by less than half a second, and both of us ended up running a 12:04. Skip forward to late season, and now my goal was to run under 12 minutes. We only had 2 races left of the season, so I had to make them count. In the next meet we had, just like Peter, we had an 8th grade runner named Timber who decided to try for once in our races because he had recently been moved up to our varsity team. At the start, I was relatively close to him, and even halfway I was sticking quite well to him. But by the end of the race, he had dropped me by quite a bit, and I finished painfully close to my goal, running 12:01. 2 more weeks of training resumed, and tapering down, we are now at our MTJL championships. This was my last chance to break 12 in the 2 mile, and I felt ready for the race. But quite literally an hour and a half before, we were playing football during PE, which I had 7th period, and I was pushed over and landed on my wrist. At first, I didn't think much of it, but as time went by, it really started to hurt, and turns out I had broken it, and I could not compete in the last race. This was probably the worst experience I've ever had, but luckily my injury healed very fast, only taking about a month and a half. As more time went by, track season came along, but since this is a cross-country progression video, I will just go over my PRs from that season. I ended up running 5:07 in the 1600 and 59 high in the 400. This is the point where I really started to improve as puberty came along that summer as well. Near the middle of July is when I started running again after break, as I had just returned from vacation. And after about 2 weeks of steady running, I was invited to a 2 mile time trial with the high school team, so of course I made sure to show up. Unfortunately, I had no footage from the race, but I ended up running a 49-second personal best in a time of 11:12, which turned out to be only 13 seconds off the middle school course record held by another one of our high school runners named Jasper. Soon after school started, so did cross country, and I had gone back to running with my friends Miles and Charlie. And a lot more of our team had made significant progress compared to the previous. Before I had any school meets, I was enrolled in a nearby invitational with my friend Miles. This course was very hilly, so I was not expecting to PR, but at least run under 11:30. I was around the top 4 at the start, but Miles had made sure to get out very quick and was fighting for the lead with another kid. The course contained about 2 laps on the track near the start of the race, and in the second lap I was able to make up a large amount of space, and midway through the race I had finally caught up back to Miles. At the end of the race we cut back onto the track, and I finished in a time of 11:20 in 2nd place. So pretty decent race on my part considering the course. By my second meet, our 8th grade runners were all on a school trip, so the varsity team was made up of me and a couple other 6th grade runners. I was expecting to win this race as well as setting a new course record because I felt great in the warm-up. This was probably the slowest start I had to all my races all season, and as you can see I'm kind of jogging, which is not the best move, but I was able to make my way to the front after the first 400. Here you can see this kid next to me named Gabe, who gave me some great competition all season. We went back and forth fighting for the lead, which led us to run a 5:18 first mile, which was way too fast for both of us. But as we entered the last half of the race, I luckily had more left in the tank and was slowly able to build a lead for myself, finishing in a time of 10:52. This was a new course record by 7 seconds at the time and the best race I had ever had. We followed this race up with some intense interval sessions on the track and more training, and it was already time for our 3rd race of the season. But this race went differently than I expected. It turned out to be a pretty hot day and my legs did not feel the best during the warm-up. And as the race started, I noticed how de-energized I was along with everyone else due to the heat, and my first mile ended up being only a 5:30, which was off pace considering I was aiming for a new course record. And as I pushed through the second half of the race with 800 meters left to run, I had basically nothing left in me and finished in a time of 11:14. This was definitely disappointing to me, but I had to realize you don't set a record every race. And at our 4th meet, we were at a new course, which happened to be another sunny location. My team and I ran through this course before the race to see how it was, but it was a very confusing route. We ended up standing in the heat for about half an hour before the race as well. The race went off fast, and this turned out to be the first appearance of one of my main competitors, Reed. Gabe and I fought to keep up with him at the start as he practically sprinted out of the gate, and it was ahead of everyone else, which is totally unexpected. I managed to catch up about halfway through the race, but I made a terrible decision by taking the lead. And keep in mind, I did not feel good, so this was not a good idea. He ended up hawking me down in the last 300 meters of the race, and it came down to a sprint. I usually have the best kick at the end of a race, so I was confident that I would beat him, but he turned out to have more energy left than me and edged me out by about 2 seconds, with me finishing in a time of 11:14 once again. By now, we had a 1-week break from school, so I used this time to increase my mileage as I hadn't taken it too seriously, which I regret, but now luckily my body seems to run fine off of lower mileage. After 2 weeks of preparation, we only had 2 meets left to school cross country. So I came into our 5th meet with a plan, and the plan was to simply push the pace so Reed would be left without a kick, and I had felt pretty good at this race. I started off pretty fast to get to the lead of the front pack of 3, which is formed by me, Reed, and Gabe, who are also sticking with me. We came to the first mile in a 5:24, which felt very good considering it was much faster than the race prior. And for the next 3/4 of the last mile, I was with Reed and Gabe, but with 400 meters left to run, I noticed how tired the other 2 looked, so I turned it on. Using my kick, I was able to power to the end of the race, finishing a time of 10:44, negative splitting my last mile. And funnily enough, Reed and Gabe also finished in a time under 11, which is unseen at this course. With a newfound confidence after this race, we pushed very hard the week after in training. This is when I ran the most difficult workout of my life, 6x800 at my goal 2 mile pace with only a minute of rest. But thankfully, we started tapering during championship week, leaving our whole team ready for the final race. Sadly, Reed was not feeling good, so he would not end up competing in this race, but it would still turn out to be a good one. This was definitely the fastest start I've ever had to a cross-country race, but I was told by my coach to take the race out in 5:15. What I have not mentioned yet is that my goals coming into the race were to run sub 10:30, which would be a really big jump, but I believed I had the ability to pull it off. For the first time, I'd found myself alone at the start of a race because of how fast I went out the gate, and you can see Charlie is also running near the front. As I approached the first mile, I got into my rhythm and came through in 5:13, which is right on. I continued to push the pace in the last half as Charlie had also started to break away from Gabe and the other runners following closely behind. I came out with 400 meters left to go, pushing myself to my absolute limit, and with 100 meters to go, I was at 10:10. I made my way down the home stretch to finish in a massive personal best of 10:27. Charlie had also managed to dip under 11, running at 10:58.